When my son tried to sell the farm my father built, I signed the papers with a smile. He thought he'd won. What he didn't know was that the farm was already gone. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am 72 years old, and I still remember the smell of sawdust in my father's hands when he first showed me this farm. His palms were thick and calloused, cracked from winters that never gave mercy and summers that demanded more sweat than a man should have to give. He had worked 3 jobs back then, hauling lumber at the mill by day, fixing fences for neighbors by evening, and sweeping the floor of the hardware store at night, just to gather enough for a down payment on these 70 acres. Land was cheap then, but sweat was not. When I was 8, he lifted me onto his shoulders and walked me down to the southern fence line. The boards were rough, freshly hammered into place. "Look, son," he said, his voice gravelly but proud. "This is ours. Every post, every blade of grass. No bank, no landlord. Just us." Even now, all these decades later, I can close my eyes and see his figure against the dusk, broad shoulders, suspenders stretched across his back, a man who traded his youth for soil and seed. Every fence post he set carried his fingerprint. Every beam in the barn held the echo of his hammer. He didn't just build a farm. He built a promise. He left it to me with one request, one I took as holy law: never let it leave the family. The farm became more than land, it became the calendar of my life. I took my first steps in the dirt by the chicken coop. I broke my first bone falling out of the hayloft, and I still feel the ache in that wrist when the weather turns. My wife, Margaret, and I carved our initials into the oak tree that shades the back field. It was beneath that same oak that I asked her to marry me, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the ring. Years later, when cancer took her from me, it was under that oak where I laid her to rest. This farm saw the births of my children, the laughter of birthday parties, the chaos of Christmas mornings when the whole family would pack into the old farmhouse. My daughter used to race the dog barefoot through the fields. My son, Daniel, once built forts out of hay bales in the barn, pretending he was a knight defending a castle. Even the hardships became part of its story. The drought of '77, when we had to haul water in barrels just to keep the cattle alive. The tornado that tore the roof off the barn in '92, I rebuilt it with my own 2 hands and the help of neighbors who believed in returning favors. Every scar the land carries is matched by one on me. And I wear them both with pride. But the farm isn't just about me. It's a chain, forged through generations. My father passed it to me. I always dreamed I'd pass it to my children, and they to theirs. Because land, true land, worked by your hands and nourished by your sweat, is not just property. It's memory made solid. I thought Daniel understood that once. When he was little, he'd sit beside me on the tractor, his small hands gripping the steering wheel while I kept my foot on the clutch. "One day, Dad, I'll drive this thing all by myself," he'd say. And I'd laugh, knowing that day would come too soon. But people change. Dreams shift. Somewhere between childhood games in the hayloft and adulthood in the city, Daniel lost sight of what this farm meant. Daniel was my firstborn, and for a long time, I thought he would be the one to carry the farm forward. When he was young, he followed me everywhere. I can still picture him trudging behind me in boots 2 sizes too big, the cuffs of his jeans rolled up twice, his little shoulders square like he was trying to match my stride. He'd help me gather eggs from the hens, though more often than not, he'd drop one and look at me with wide, guilty eyes. I never scolded him. I'd just ruffle his hair and say, "That's the price of learning." When storms came through, he'd stand at the window with his hands pressed to the glass, watching the wind bend the trees. "We'll be all right, won't we, Dad?" he'd ask. And I'd kneel beside him, pull him close, and tell him what my father once told me: as long as the family sticks together, we can weather anything. Through those years, he seemed grateful. At Christmas, he'd scribble little notes on scraps of paper: "Thanks for fixing my bike, Dad. Thanks for letting me ride the tractor." He'd slip them into my coat pocket without saying a word, as though he didn't want me to know he cared that much. I kept every one of those notes in a drawer by my bed. But as Daniel grew older, small cracks began to show. In high school, he started complaining about the farm. "Why do we have to live so far from town? Why can't we have a normal life, like my friends?" He'd snap whenever chores kept him from a football game or a Friday night out. I'd try to explain that the land was our life, that it gave us everything we had. He'd roll his eyes, as if I were speaking a language he no longer wanted to learn. College was the turning point. We paid for it, Margaret and I, scrimping, saving, selling 2 parcels of timber just to give him a chance we never had. At first, he thanked us, calling home every Sunday, telling us how much he appreciated the sacrifices. But as the semesters rolled by, his tone shifted. He started talking about real opportunities in the city, about how farming was backward, about how people like us never really make it. The last time he came home during those years, I asked him to help mend a section of fence. He sighed, pulled out his phone, and said, "Dad, you don't get it. I'm not going to waste my life swinging hammers like you." The word stung, not because of what he said, but because of the disdain in his voice, the same voice that once asked me if we'd weather storms together. After college, he married quickly, a city girl named Allison who liked the look of the farmhouse for holiday photos but never spent a night there without complaining about the bugs. She encouraged Daniel to invest in businesses he barely understood. Each time one failed, he came back, hat in hand, asking for help. And each time, I gave it. I told myself it was what a father did. But gratitude faded into expectation. When I paid off his debts the second time, he didn't say thank you. He just muttered, "Took you long enough." When I gave him money for a down payment on his house, he didn't call it a gift, he called it, "What you owe me." And slowly, I saw something grow in him, something sour. Not just entitlement, but envy. He began to look at the farm not as a legacy, but as a vault. Not as history, but as profit. The boy who once tucked thank you notes into my coat had become a man who saw me not as a father, but as an obstacle. Then came the phone call. It was late afternoon, the kind of winter day where the sun never really shines, it just hangs pale and weak above the horizon. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my wife's old teacup still in its place on the shelf across from me, when the phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was calling just to check in, to ask how I was holding up, like sons should. I answered, steadying my voice. "Hello, Daniel." "Dad," he said, clipped, efficient. There was no warmth. No hesitation. His voice carried the sharp edge of a man who had practiced this speech in front of a mirror. "We need to be realistic. The farm is too much for you. You can't keep up with it anymore. My hand tightened on the receiver. My knees had been aching for months, yes. My back groaned each morning like old timbers in a storm. But I'd never admitted that to him. Never. I've managed fine for 50 years, I replied, forcing a calm I didn't feel. It's worth nearly $3 million now, he pressed on, his tone gaining momentum. Think about what that money could do for the family. For Emma's college. For my business. His business. Always his business. Every dollar I gave him over the years disappeared into some opportunity that collapsed before it ever took root. He dressed it in noble words, family, future, growth, but underneath, it was always the same hunger. I drew in a breath, felt it scrape against my chest like sandpaper. I'm not selling, Daniel. There was silence. A dangerous silence. I imagined him on the other end, lips tightening, eyes narrowing. Then he spoke again, quieter now, each word carefully chosen. You don't have to, he said. The power of attorney you signed last year, remember? When you were in the hospital. It gives me the right. I froze. The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. I remembered the paperwork, the way he'd rushed me through it in that hospital bed. He'd called it temporary. Just a safety net while I recovered from surgery. I had trusted him. My son. The chair beneath me felt suddenly small, fragile. My father's voice echoed in my head, never let it leave the family. Had I betrayed him without even knowing? You tricked me, I whispered, though not into the phone, just into the stale air of my kitchen. Dad, Daniel continued, his tone softening into something that might have sounded like sympathy to anyone who didn't know him. This is for the best. You can't carry this place forever. Let me take it off your shoulders. You'll have money for whatever you need. Comfort. Security. Isn't that what you've always wanted? I closed my eyes, and behind them, I saw Margaret smile the day we planted the oak tree. I saw my father's cracked hands gripping mine, telling me this land was ours. Comfort. Security. I already had those things, right here, in the soil beneath my boots, in the walls of the farmhouse that had cradled 3 generations. I'll think about it, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. Good, he replied quickly, too quickly. Relief flooded his tone. I'll draw up the final paperwork. Just a formality at this point. We'll do what's right for everyone. For everyone. That was the lie he told himself. And maybe he even believed it. When the call ended, I didn't move. The phone sat in my hand until the screen went dark, until the silence in the kitchen pressed against my ears like heavy wool. Finally, I set it down, slowly, carefully, as if any sudden motion might shatter what little I had left of certainty. My knees creaked as I rose and walked to the window above the sink. The field stretched wide, painted in the bruised colors of twilight. Frost clung to the ground like a second skin. Out there, beyond the barn, was the oak tree where Margaret rested. I pressed my palm against the cool glass. Can you believe it, Maggie? I whispered. Our son. Our boy. The house gave no answer. Just the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall and the hum of the old refrigerator. I pulled a chair out and sank back down, burying my face in my hands. For the first time in years, I let the sobs come. My chest heaved, raw and hollow. I wasn't just grieving a betrayal, I was grieving the boy Daniel used to be. The one who scribbled thank you notes and laughed when he spilled eggs. The boy was gone, replaced by a man I barely recognized. Through the haze of tears, the memories began to tumble back, not the sweet ones, but the cracks I'd ignored. I remembered his high school graduation, when Margaret asked him to say a few words of thanks. Instead of gratitude, he boasted about leaving this dead-end town behind. I laughed it off then, telling myself it was just youthful arrogance. I remembered the Christmas after his wedding, when he and Allison opened the check we'd given them to help with their mortgage. Instead of thanks, Allison frowned and said, "Is that all?" Daniel had laughed, clapping me on the back, as though the insult were a joke we could all share. I remembered the night he came home, drunk and red-faced, after one of his failed ventures. He had slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "You don't understand what it's like to build something real, Dad. You've had everything handed to you. Everything handed to me." As though his grandfather's sweat, my decades of labor, the nights I worked 2 jobs just to keep the farm afloat during the drought, meant nothing. The anger surged up, hot and unfamiliar. For most of my life, I had been patient with him. I had forgiven, excused, explained away. Fathers are supposed to protect, not punish. But now, staring at the phone that had carried his betrayal into my kitchen, I realized something stark and final. If I let him do this, if I let him sell the farm, then all the sacrifices of my father, all the love Margaret poured into this land, all the years I bent my back until it nearly broke, it would all dissolve into nothing more than a profit line on Daniel's balance sheet. No. This wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about respect. It was about memory. It was about justice. I wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand, the tears leaving salt on my skin. Slowly, a different kind of weight settled over me, not grief this time, but resolve. "If it's a fight he wants," I whispered to the empty room, "then a fight he'll have." I stood, straightening my spine as much as my age would allow. My father had fought with his hands. I would fight with my mind. Daniel thought he had outsmarted me with legal papers and smooth words. But I had lived too long, worked too hard, to let him bury me alive in the soil my family had built with blood. The thought of revenge no longer felt ugly. It felt right. Not vengeance for vengeance's sake, but justice. A balancing of the scales. And this time, I would not hesitate. I walked to Margaret's photograph on the mantel and touched the frame with my fingertips. "I'll take care of it, Maggie. I'll protect what's ours. I promise." The next morning, I woke to the sound of tires crunching on the gravel drive. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking Daniel had come to finish the argument. But when I pulled back the curtain, I saw a smaller figure bounding up the porch steps. Matthew. At 10 years old, my grandson was all knees and elbows, his backpack hanging half open, one shoelace untied. He didn't bother knocking, he never did. The door swung wide, and his voice rang through the house. "Grandpa. You up?" I smiled despite myself. In the kitchen, Matt. He came skidding in, nearly knocking over Margaret's old side table in the hall, his cheeks pink from the cold. He plopped his backpack on the chair beside me and pulled out a crumpled sketchbook. "Look," he said, flipping it open. Inside was a drawing of the barn, shaky lines and uneven shading, but I recognized it instantly. Even the crooked weather vane I'd never gotten around to fixing. "You did this?" I asked, running my fingers gently over the page. He nodded eagerly. "For art class. Teacher said to draw something important. Everyone else drew their houses or pets, but I drew the farm. I told them this is the best place in the whole world." The words landed heavy, but not in the way Daniel's had. Heavy like a truth too big for a small boy to carry alone. I swallowed hard. "Why's it the best, Matthew?" "Because it's ours," he said simply. "You said it's been in the family forever. And one day, you'll teach me how to drive the tractor, right?" His eyes shone, filled with the same wonder Daniel once had, back before greed soured it. I pulled him into a hug, holding on longer than he probably understood. His hair smelled faintly of the shampoo Allison insisted on buying in bulk. "Yes," I said into his hair. "One day I'll teach you everything. How to drive the tractor. How to mend a fence. How to listen to the land." He squirmed out of my arms, grinning. "Good. Because I'm gonna be the best farmer ever. Better than Dad at least, he doesn't even like getting dirty." The innocence in his words struck like a hammer. He didn't know. He didn't hear the phone call. He still believed in a world where this farm would pass from hand to hand, never broken, never sold. "Grandpa," he asked, stuffing the sketchbook back into his bag. "Will the farm always be here?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my chest heavy with the weight of promises past and future. I thought of my father's cracked hands, of Margaret's laugh under the oak, of Daniel's sharp voice on the phone. "Yes, Matthew," I said finally, my voice steady now. "It will always be here. For you. For your children. I'll make sure of it." He beamed, satisfied with that simple answer, and ran off toward the barn, his laughter carrying through the cold morning air. I stayed at the table, staring at the place where his drawing had rested. For the first time since Daniel's call, I felt clear. I wasn't just fighting for the past anymore. I was fighting for Matthew's future. And if that meant outsmarting my own son, then so be it. That night, after Matthew had gone home and the farmhouse was quiet again, I sat at the old oak desk in my study. Margaret's photograph rested beside a lamp that cast long shadows across stacks of unopened mail. For years, I'd avoided looking too closely at legal documents, life insurance, land surveys, bank notices. They reminded me too much of time slipping through my fingers. But tonight, I pulled everything into the light. I opened the bottom drawer, stiff from disuse, and laid out the deed to the farm. The paper was yellowed at the edges, my father's signature still dark in black ink at the bottom. His handwriting, bold, firm, seemed to stare back at me, demanding I honor what he'd built. For a long while, I simply rested my hand on it. I thought of the calloused palm that had first pressed it into mine. I remembered the way he said, "Son, this land is your spine. As long as you keep it, you'll never break." Daniel had tried to turn that spine into a bargaining chip. He thought I'd grown too old, too tired to fight. But I wasn't broken yet. The next morning, I made the drive into town. The law office sat on Main Street, the same brick building where Margaret and I had signed our marriage license 50 years ago. The receptionist recognized me, her eyes softening when she saw the papers tucked under my arm. Inside, my lawyer, an old friend named Harris, listened as I explained. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. I spoke of Daniel's eagerness to sell, of my worry for the farm's future, of the grandson who saw this place as the best in the whole world. Harris leaned back in his chair, studying me over his glasses. "You're ready to put this land somewhere safe," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. "Safe from everyone. Even my own blood." We didn't speak much after that. He drafted documents, and I signed. My name looped across the pages, each stroke heavier than the last. With every signature, I felt like I was driving a nail into the coffin of Daniel's schemes. But more than that, I felt like I was building a shield for Matthew. When it was done, Harris slid the final paper across the desk. "This trust ensures it stays in the family," he said. "Your grandson's family." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat burned, but it wasn't sorrow this time, it was relief. For the first time since Daniel's call, I felt a steady ground beneath my feet. On the drive home, the field stretched golden in the fading light, the barn standing proud against the horizon. I rolled down the window and breathed deep. The air was sharp, clean, filled with the smell of frost and hay. This land was no longer Daniel's to covet. It belonged to the future. To Matthew. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. My son thought he had cornered me, thought I was too old, too blind to see his trap. But the game had changed. I wasn't planning for revenge anymore. I was enacting it. It didn't take long for Daniel to show up. 2 days after I signed the trust papers, his shiny black SUV pulled into the driveway, the kind of car that looks like it's allergic to dirt roads. He stepped out wearing a tailored coat, leather shoes too clean for farmland. His wife, Allison, stayed inside, scrolling on her phone, not even glancing at the field she always claimed smelled like animals. Daniel strode up the porch steps like he owned the place already. He didn't knock, he never did anymore. He pushed open the door and walked into my kitchen, his eyes scanning the room as if he were already calculating which antiques might fetch a good price. "Dad," he said with a smile too wide, too rehearsed. "You've made the right choice. I knew you'd see reason eventually." I sat at the table, the same table where Margaret used to set her Sunday roasts, my hands folded in front of me. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to hear just how far he'd go. He pulled out a chair, sat down across from me, and leaned forward. "You're going to thank me one day. 3 million, Dad. Do you understand what that means? No more worrying about maintenance, no more aching knees fixing fences, no more sleepless nights about taxes. You can finally relax. Relax." The word curdled in my ears. He didn't want me to relax. He wanted me gone, tucked away somewhere out of sight while he cashed in. I stayed quiet, watching him. His face was Margaret's face twisted into arrogance, her sharp cheekbones, her quick smile, but none of her kindness. He mistook my silence for surrender. "I already spoke with the buyers," he continued, tapping his finger on the table like a man sealing a deal. "They're excited. A golf resort, Dad. Think about it. Instead of cows and corn, you'll have manicured greens and people paying top dollar for membership. This place will finally be worth something. Finally worth something." I gripped the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles whitened. Did he truly believe the farm wasn't worth something already? Did he not see the value in the oak tree where his mother rested, in the soil my father bled for, in the walls that had sheltered him as a child? He leaned back, smug, crossing his arms. Look, I know change is hard for you. But this is the future. And you should be grateful I'm handling it. Most men your age can't even manage their own affairs. I'm making sure you don't embarrass yourself. My jaw tightened, but still I said nothing. Not yet. Daniel's smile widened. Don't worry. You'll get a nice place out of it. Allison and I found a retirement community just outside the city. Has a pool, a golf course, even a shuttle bus. You'll love it there. No responsibilities, no stress. A retirement community. He was already packing me off like an unwanted suitcase. I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't the boy who once followed me through the fields, boots too big and eyes wide with wonder. That boy was long gone. Sitting across from me now was a man who saw family as currency, memory as wasted space. I let a small smile creep onto my face, careful, measured. If you say so, Daniel. He mistook it for agreement. He clapped his hands together, triumphant. Exactly. I knew you'd understand. Trust me, Dad, this is the best thing that could happen for all of us. Trust me. He stood, buttoned his coat, and patted my shoulder like a man congratulating himself. I'll see you in court next week to finalize. Just show up, sign what they give you, and let me do the talking. You'll thank me. I watched him leave, his footsteps loud against the porch boards I'd replaced myself after the last storm. His SUV roared down the drive, leaving a trail of dust behind. Only when the sound faded did I allow myself to laugh. Low, bitter at first, then louder, freer. He thought he'd won. He thought I'd already surrendered. But next week, when the court doors closed behind us, Daniel would learn just how badly he had underestimated his father. The morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. My body had grown used to farm hours, and though there was no livestock left to tend, my bones still stirred at the first hint of light. I brewed a pot of coffee, black and strong, and sat at the kitchen table with Margaret's photograph watching me from the mantel. This is it, Maggie, I whispered. Today he learns. I dressed carefully, choosing my best suit, the same gray one I'd worn to Margaret's funeral. The fabric was worn at the elbows, the tie frayed at the edges, but it carried weight. It reminded me of promises made and oaths kept. If I was going to face my son in court, I would carry my history with me like armor. The drive into town was quiet, the frost glinting off the fields like scattered glass. I passed the oak tree, its branches bare but still strong, and nodded toward it as though Margaret might be listening. When I arrived at the courthouse, Daniel was already there, striding across the parking lot with Allison at his side. She wore a fur-trimmed coat, oversized sunglasses, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Daniel carried a leather briefcase, though I knew it was empty. He liked the look of importance more than the substance. He spotted me and waved with exaggerated cheer, as though we were meeting for brunch instead of war. Dad, he called. Glad you made it. Don't worry, I'll handle everything. Just nod when they ask you questions. This'll be over before you know it. I nodded, keeping my face unreadable. Inside, my heart pounded like a drum, but not from fear. From anticipation. The courtroom smelled of polish and old paper. A clerk shuffled through stacks of documents at the front, while the judge adjusted his glasses and glanced over the docket. I took my seat in the back row, my lawyer Harris at my side, his calm presence a steady anchor. Daniel sat at the petitioner's table, leaning back in his chair, tapping his pen against the wood. He whispered something to Allison, who laughed softly, tilting her head just so, already picturing herself in a new house bought with the money from my land. I watched them without speaking, letting their confidence swell, letting them believe the ground was solid beneath their feet. Harris leaned toward me, his voice low. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be," I murmured. When the bailiff called the case, Daniel stood with the confidence of a man certain of victory. He spoke with ease, his words polished. He painted me as an aging father unable to manage his affairs, a man who had wisely entrusted his capable son to ensure the family's financial stability. Each word twisted in my gut, but I let him speak. Let him build his tower of arrogance, brick by brick, because I knew exactly how it would fall. When it was my turn, Harris rose slowly, smoothing his tie. His voice was calm, deliberate. He spoke not of my age or my supposed weakness, but of legacy, of trust, of the law's role in protecting not just assets, but intention. He laid the papers on the judge's bench, his hand steady. "This farm," he said, "is not Mr. Daniel Collins's to sell. It is held in trust, irrevocable and binding, for the sole benefit of his son, Matthew Collins." The words hung in the air, heavy as a gavel itself. Daniel frowned, then laughed, certain it was some mistake. "That can't be right," he said, turning to me. "Dad, tell them. You signed the papers. You agreed." I met his gaze, and for the first time in years, I felt no fear, no hesitation. Just clarity. "I signed papers, yes," I said quietly. "But not the ones you think." The judge leaned forward, examining the documents, his brow furrowing. The clerk whispered something in his ear, pointing to the signatures, the dates. Daniel's face paled. Allison's hand slipped from his arm. The courtroom, once filled with the sound of his confidence, now held only silence. The moment I had waited for was just beginning. The judge adjusted his glasses, studying the pages Harris had laid before him. His gavel tapped once against the desk, a habit more than a command. "These documents are in proper order," he said slowly. "This farm is held in an irrevocable trust, executed 2 weeks prior to the petition brought before this court." He looked over the rims of his glasses directly at Daniel. "Which means, Mr. Collins, you have no authority to sell the property." "None whatsoever." The words struck like thunder. Daniel shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "That's impossible. My father gave me power of attorney, he signed it himself." His voice cracked, betraying the panic creeping into his chest. The judge lifted a hand, silencing him with the authority of the bench. Power of attorney does not supersede a trust once executed, particularly one prepared with full legal counsel. Your father acted within his rights. This court recognizes the trust as binding. Daniel turned to me then, his face twisted, red blotches spreading up his neck. His eyes were wide, not with confusion but with disbelief, like a gambler who'd gone all in only to realize the deck was stacked against him. "Dad," he hissed, his voice low but sharp enough for me to hear across the quiet courtroom. "What did you do?" I rose slowly, my cane tapping against the polished floor, and met his gaze without wavering. I did what my father asked me to do. I kept the farm in the family. For Matthew. At the mention of his son's name, Daniel flinched as though struck. Allison shifted in her seat beside him, her sunglasses now perched uselessly atop her head. The smug smile she'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by thin, tight lips. She whispered furiously into Daniel's ear, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. $3 million, she hissed, not caring who heard. Do you know what we just lost? Daniel pulled his arm free, his hands shaking. This isn't fair, he muttered, louder now. You tricked me. The judge's gavel cracked once, sharp and final. Order. The case is dismissed. This court recognizes Richard Collins as trustee of the Collins Family Farm Trust. That is final. The gavel fell again, the sound echoing through the room like the closing of a tomb. I let the moment settle, the silence wrapping around us. For the first time in years, I felt taller, straighter, as though the weight I'd been carrying had finally shifted off my shoulders. My father's words echoed in my mind, never let it leave the family. And I hadn't. As people shuffled out of the courtroom, Daniel slumped back into his chair, staring at nothing. His face was pale now, drained of all triumph. Allison stood, furious, her heels clicking like gunshots against the floor as she stormed toward the exit. She didn't wait for him. I turned to Harris, who gave me a quiet nod. Well done, he murmured. But the true victory wasn't his to acknowledge, it was mine. I walked past Daniel on my way out, pausing just long enough to rest a hand on his shoulder. He flinched as though my touch burned. You thought I was weak, I said softly, so only he could hear. You thought trust was the same as blindness. But you forgot one thing, son. His eyes flicked up, desperate, angry. What? I learned from my father too. I left him sitting there, surrounded by papers that no longer held any power, his grand schemes reduced to dust. Outside, the winter sun broke through the clouds, casting light across the courthouse steps. I drew in a deep breath, the air sharp and clean. Triumph didn't feel like gloating, or revenge, or even pride. It felt like justice. It felt like Margaret's laughter under the oak, my father's hand on mine, Matthew's wide smile when he said the farm was the best place in the world. It felt like victory. And as I stepped into the sunlight, cane tapping steady against the stone, I knew one thing with certainty, Daniel would never forget this day. The farm was quiet again. A week had passed since the courtroom, and the land seemed to breathe easier, as if it too knew it had been spared. Matthew came over that Saturday, bounding out of his father's car before it had even rolled to a stop. Daniel didn't get out, he never looked toward the house, never waved. He just waited behind the wheel, engine idling, his face hidden behind the windshield. Matthew ran up the porch steps, his cheeks flushed from the cold. Grandpa. Can we go see the creek? Of course, I said, taking his hand. We walked together through the fields. The frost crunched under our boots, the air sharp with the smell of hay and earth. The barn stood tall in the distance, its weathered boards glowing amber in the low winter sun. Matthew pointed toward it, grinning. One day, I'm gonna fix that roof. And maybe paint it red. Like the ones in the picture books. I chuckled. Then it'll be the finest barn in the county. We reached the creek, its water slow and glassy, catching shards of sunlight between thin sheets of ice. Matthew skipped a stone across it, his small arm swinging wide. The rock bounced twice before sinking, ripples spreading outward. We walked on, climbing the gentle slope toward the oak tree at the edge of the back field. Its branches stretched high, bare now but still strong, silhouetted against the sky. I paused there, letting my fingers brush its rough bark. "This tree," I told Matthew, "is where I asked your grandmother to marry me. And it's where we laid her to rest. Every season, I come here to remember her." Matthew pressed his small hand against the trunk beside mine, his eyes wide with wonder. "So it's like the heart of the farm." "Yes," I said, my throat tight. "Exactly that." For a long moment, we stood together in silence, listening to the wind moving through the branches. It carried no bitterness, no anger, only peace. When we finally walked back toward the house, Matthew skipped beside me, humming a tune he must have learned at school. The farmhouse came into view, its windows catching the last glow of the day. "Grandpa," he said, glancing up at me. "The farm will always be mine one day, right?" I squeezed his hand gently. "Yes, Matthew. Yours to keep. Yours to pass on when the time comes. This land isn't just dirt, it's family. And as long as we remember that, it will never be lost." He smiled, satisfied, and together we walked the last stretch home. Behind us, the oak tree stood guard, the field stretched wide, and the farm, our farm, remained whole. And for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.